Today's lesson is violent video games. Harmless fun or gateways to violence? Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to be talking about video games, the kinds of games that you can play on your phone or on your tablet or on your PC. But more specifically, we're going to be talking about violent video games and whether or not they're harmless fun or whether they can lead to violence.
Absolutely. Video games, of course, are very, very popular. In fact, the video game industry makes as much money as the movie, TV, and music industries combined. So clearly, people are playing a lot of games. And yes, many of them are still violent. Although the selection and choice of games has grown a lot over the last few decades, a lot of them still do involve shooting things, blowing things up, and killing people. So is this a bad thing, especially for young minds? It's a debate that's been going on for a long time, and it has no sign of going away anytime soon. So let's check out violent video games. Are they just harmless fun or gateways to further violence? Violent video games, harmless fun or gateways to violence? Video games filled with killing and other acts of violence are a favorite of many teenagers. Are they just harmless fun? Or should they be banned for being damaging to young minds? Opinions differ widely. Here's how 8 people of different ages responded when asked, are violent video games an appropriate form of entertainment for teenagers?
大家好，第一部分我们来看到标题中的 gateway， 它是名词，表示出入口或是门道。例如 Persistence and diligence is the gateway to success. 坚持和勤奋是通往成功的大门。又或者说 Hong Kong is considered the gateway to Asia because it is such an important city. 香港是个重要城市，被认为是通往亚洲的门户。接下来介绍动词 ban， 意思是明令禁止或是取缔。例如 The apartment building decided to ban smoking in all public areas. 那栋公寓大楼决议所有公共区域禁烟。或是 After getting into a fight at the Italian restaurant, Steve was banned for life. Steve 在那家意大利餐厅中打架后，终身都被禁止踏入那里。再来是动词 differ， 它指的是与点点点不同或是有区別。例如 How does your new job differ from your old one? 你的新工作跟旧工作有哪里不同？另外补充相关名词 differential， D-I-F-F-E-R-E-N-T-I-A-L differential 表示差额或是差距。我们可以说 Due to the functionality, there is a huge price differential between these two laptops. 基于功能，这两款笔记型电脑的价格差距很大。又或者说 The great wage differential between employees and management caused the strike. 员工和管理阶层间的巨大薪资差距引发了罢工。下一个是 entertainment， 这个名词的意思是娱乐、娱乐表演或是节目。例如 There will be many forms of entertainment for children at the fair. 园游会上会有很多给小朋友的娱乐项目。或是 Charles likes to go to the movies for entertainment. Charles 喜欢看电影作为消遣娱乐。
Okay, it's time for us to discuss the contents of the first part of our lesson for today. Again, we're talking about the title here. Of course, video games have a lot of violence. That's the noun. Violent is the adjective. So we're talking about violent video games. And we're asking the question, are they harmless fun? Do they not cause any problems at all if somebody plays them and they shoot up lots of people and you see lots of blood and guts flying across the screen? Or are they gateways to violence? So if you play those video games and you see all that violence, will you yourself start committing violence for real, like joining a gang or something and murdering lots of people? That's the question we're trying to answer today.
That's right. When we use gateway in this way, we are not talking about the entrance through a fence, which of course could be a gateway. You can find a gateway in a castle. That's the entrance way through the walls of the castle. But we also use this in another way, not in a literal way of being a gate, but sort of the first step or the way you begin a certain type of behavior or habit. A lot of people might say smoking or drinking among young people might be a gateway to drugs or something like that. Or if you're looking to get in shape, maybe taking an exercise class or a yoga class will be a gateway to a healthier lifestyle, sort of a beginning point, a starting point, or something like that. So, are video games just fun, or do they lead to further violence? Do they make people more used to violence, less affected by it, and maybe develop a taste for it in certain people, especially in young people? So let's have a look at the first sentence. Video games filled with killing and other acts of violence are a favorite of many teenagers. Absolutely. From first-person and third-person shooters to RTS or real-time strategy games where you're fighting whole battles with armies. There is a lot of killing and violence in many games, and many of these games are favorites or very popular among teenagers of all the types.
Indeed. Are you a big fan of video games, Mike?
I do play video games. I find my taste for violent video games has never been particularly strong, and these days I look for the most relaxing games I can find, so violence is often not a part of them in any way. But yeah, a lot of them are quite violent. When I watch ads or, commercials for new games, many times right away I go, that game is not for me. Too many zombies, too many heads being chopped off, and things like that. So are they just harmless fun? That is a very serious and interesting question.
Very much so. And yes, indeed, these video games are a favorite of many teenagers as well as adults and maybe small children as well. Some parents, they're not supervising their young children enough and not watching what they're playing on their phones. But anyway, here's the next sentence. It says, are they just harmless fun, or should they be banned for being damaging to young minds? So yeah, a lot of people will think they're harmless fun. Yeah, they're violent, but it doesn't mean we're going to get some ideas about shooting up our neighbors for making us stay up late at night. No, it's just harmless. We're just playing the game and then we forget about it. Or the other part of this question is, should they be banned for being damaging to young minds? So here, banned is from the verb to ban, which means to not allow something to take place in a certain society. In certain societies, books were banned because they had really bad ideas and the government didn't want people knowing about these things. So books were banned. And here we're talking about the question, these are violent video games. Should they be banned? Should no one be allowed to play them?
Because they could be damaging to young minds in the same way that smoking and drinking is banned for young people because it's damaging to young bodies. So yeah, we look to make things illegal or at least restrict their use or their availability to certain groups, especially young people, because we want to protect them from things that might not be so harmful to adults, but would definitely be harmful to young minds and bodies. Opinions differ widely, it says there. That's why we're still having this debate, this conversation, because there are very different opinions. Some people say, yes, they're all very dangerous. They should all be banned. Others people would say, well, no, because people have been committing violence for centuries, not just since video games have come around. And there are many cases of people who don't play video games doing violent acts. So there's a big range of differences, or opinions differ widely. See how we're using the word differ there? Differ would be the verb form of different or difference. So if things are different, if there's a big difference between those things, then they differ. And if there's a huge difference, then they differ widely. There's a big range of many different opinions on this topic.
Yep, to differ just means to be different, to be unlike. For example, I could say, the new information differs from the old information. They're not the same. And so here, opinions differ widely. Some people think that the video games are harmless. Other people think that they should be banned or at least restricted or something like that. And here's how 8 people of different ages responded when asked, are violent video games an appropriate form of entertainment for teenagers? So we've got some testimonies from some different people here. We've interviewed 8 different people, and they are of 8 different ages, young and old and middle-aged. And, of course, they have different opinions about this very question, and that very question is, are violent video games an appropriate form of entertainment for teenagers? Now, something's appropriate, that means it's suitable. For example, a t-shirt is not appropriate clothing for a wedding. You cannot go to a wedding wearing a t-shirt. It is not appropriate.
Absolutely. Not even a very casual wedding. Would that be appropriate? So are they appropriate? Is it okay for kids to be playing violent video games, or is it an appropriate form of entertainment? Entertainment, that's the things that we do for fun. Things you do on the weekend in your free time, things that make you happy and give you pleasure of some kind, generally by watching or consuming some kind of media, listening to music, watching television and movies. These are very common forms of entertainment along with video games. So, yeah, when we're talking about kids, is it okay for kids to play these violent video games? There's lots of other types of entertainment. We have a few different people with a few different opinions, as you can probably expect. So let's get into them and hear what people think. Liam, 17. Yes, they're just games. I've played them for years, and I'm not violent at all. A lot of adults think that young people can't tell fantasy from reality, but that's ridiculous. Maybe it's true for very young children, but not for teens. It's just like watching action movies. We know they're just dumb fun, not something to copy in real life.
Sarah, 42. Not for my teenagers. I worry that by playing violent video games regularly, they'll start seeing violence as a solution to everything. I don't want my children's first reaction to a problem to be shoot, shoot, kill, kill.
第二部分来介绍名词 fantasy， 它指的是幻想、想象或是幻想的场景。举例来说 Nora has a fantasy of living in a big house by the sea.Nora 幻想住在海边的大房子。又或者说 Harry Potter is a popular fantasy novel series. 哈利波特是一部很受欢迎的奇幻小说系列。接下来我们看到 ridiculous， 它是形容词，表示荒谬的或是可笑的。可以说 The story in the tabloid newspaper was filled with ridiculous rumors. 八卦小报中的那则新闻充满了荒谬的谣言。
Okay, so our first person who was interviewed is Liam. He's 17 years old. He's a teenager. He's quite young. And he answers yes to this question. Yes, they are an appropriate form of entertainment for teenagers. He says they're just games. They're nothing else. Don't make a big deal out of it. I've played them for years, and I'm not violent at all. So this is his personal testimony. He has played them a lot for many, many years, and he doesn't go out and beat people up every day after playing video games. He's normal. He's not violent at all.
And he kind of repeats something that he's probably heard when people are talking about banning video games for young people. A lot of adults think that young people can't tell fantasy from reality, but that's ridiculous, okay? Yes, because this is something you often hear from, parents, maybe politicians, educators, people who want to ban these games. They might say that young people can't tell fantasy from reality, or kids playing games will get confused between the game world and the real world. The actions in the game world that might have no consequences. You don't actually hurt people or get in trouble for committing violent acts in games, but in the real world, of course, you do. People do get hurt. There are consequences. Some grown-ups or adults might say, oh, young people can't tell the difference between the game world and the real world, or fantasy from reality. To tell something from something is to be able to point out the differences. If it's two twins that you've never met before and they look very, very similar, it might be very difficult to tell one from the other. Whereas if you have twins in your family, or maybe pets that look very similar, to a stranger they might look the the same, but you will be able to tell one from the other or notice the differences between them. Here he's talking about, though, telling fantasy from reality. Reality, the real world, the world that we live in, not the world of imagination or storytelling or fiction or anything like that. Fantasy, though, that would be the imaginary world, the world inside your mind, the world inside your imagination, or a world created by a writer, a fictional world, something like that. So most people, if they're not having problems with their thinking process, will be able to tell the real world from the fictional world or fantasy from reality. And so that's why Liam thinks it's ridiculous that adults might say that kids can't.
Yep, it's silly, it's not logical, it's ridiculous, it's a dumb idea. And so he thinks that the idea of video games being banned is silly, it's ridiculous, it's stupid, it's dumb. And he goes on to say, maybe it's true for very young children, but not for teens. Yes, very young children, maybe 3 or 4 years old, should not be playing violent video games. But teenagers between the ages of 13 and 18 are okay. They're old enough to be responsible, and they can separate fantasy from reality. Liam goes on to say, it's just like watching action movies. We know they're just dumb fun, not something to copy in real life. So yeah, violent video games are similar to action movies. We know they're just fun and they're dumb fun. They're silly. They're ridiculous. We know they're dumb. We're not going to be influenced by those things. And we cannot copy such behavior in real life. We know the difference.
There you go. He knows it's just entertainment. But Sarah has a different point of view. Now we notice there that Sarah is 42 years old, so definitely an adult. Let's see her opinion on this topic. She says, not for my teenagers. I worry that by playing violent video games regularly, they'll start seeing violence as a solution to everything. Okay, so this is definitely a parent's point of view. She says not for her teenagers. I guess in her home, violent video games are banned for her kids, her teenagers. And she explains why. She worries that by playing these games and seeing this violence regularly or often, they'll start seeing violence as a solution to everything. If you see something as something, that's basically your interpretation of it, how you view it, sort of how you organize it in your mind. If you see violence as a solution, then when you have a problem and you need a solution, you might think hurting someone or hitting someone or using violence is an appropriate, acceptable, okay way to find that solution. And of course, it's not, and that's why we have laws and things like that prevent us from hitting people when we're angry with them or something like that. So she's afraid, though, that by performing those types of violent acts, using violence as a solution, killing the bad guy to get to the next level, for example, in a game, kids might start to think that that's okay to do in the real world. So when they're frustrated, when they're faced with a situation or a person who won't do what they want, they might choose to use violence instead of reasoning, rational, peaceful behavior. She says, I don't want my children's first reaction to a problem to be shoot, shoot, kill, kill, because often in the game, that's the only reaction to a problem or the only possible solution. You kill the bad guy and then you move on in the game. Of course, the real world, that is not acceptable or appropriate at all.
Right, so that's of Sarah, of course. She's a mother. She's 42 years old, and she's worried about the behavior of her teenagers, and she probably doesn't want them playing violent video games. Okay, let's move on now to the third part of our lesson and find out what Jordan has to say.
Jordan, 25. Well, I grew up playing them, and I turned out fine. In fact, I was quite an angry teenager, but I found that playing those games helped me let off steam. So, in a weird way, they help make me less aggressive.
第三部分来看到 let 或是 blow off steam 这个片语，意思是发泄情绪或是释放精力。例如 Jake lets off steam via binge eating. Jake 透过暴饮暴食来发泄情绪。或是 After fighting with his girlfriend, Martin went to karaoke with his friends to blow off steam. 在跟女友吵架完后 Martin 和朋友一起去卡拉 OK 发泄情绪。
All right, we're back with Jordan. Now, Jordan is kind of in the middle here. Liam was a young person at 17. Sarah, a concerned mom at 42. Jordan, it says there, is 25. So let's see his slightly more mature young adult interpretation or opinion of this. He says, well, I grew up playing them, and I turned out fine. So his evidence is in his own personal experience. He grew up playing them from a young age of, 10, 12, 13. He started playing games and then maybe got into more violent ones as he got older. And in his opinion, he turned out fine. The result of this childhood, Jordan as a young 25-year-old, he thinks he's fine. He's not a violent person. He's not in trouble with the law. He's never, attacked anyone or anything like that. So even though he played those games, it hasn't affected him. There's no evidence of that in his life. In fact, he says, I was quite an angry teenager, but I found that playing those games helped me let off steam. Interesting. He's kind of got an opposite opinion. He thinks that they were actually good for him. The violence helped him in a way to sort of work out his angry emotions. A lot of teenagers, of course, as we know, go through a lot of different emotional stages as they mature, as they go through puberty. Some of those things can be feeling frustrated that you're being treated like a child by your parents, being bullied or mistreated at school, for example. It turned into a lot of anger in Jordan, but instead of hurting someone or hitting someone, getting in fights at school, that kind of thing, he found that playing those games at home helped him let off steam, helped him release some of his anger, some of his sort of built-up feelings of unhappiness and things like that. So instead of hurting people in the real world, he would come home, shoot a bunch of zombies or aliens in his game, and he would feel much better. He would let off steam in the same way that some people might listen to loud music or dance around or something to let off steam, let off energy, let those bad feelings out so that they can return to a calmer, happier headspace.
And the final sentence here says, so in a weird way, in a strange or unusual way, they helped make me less aggressive. If you're aggressive, of course, you push yourself on other people. Like if you're driving in rush hour traffic, you need to be aggressive or you're going to be left behind. And so, yes, maybe he could take out his frustrations on those video games. Maybe he wanted to beat up his boss or his coworkers or something like that. So if he played these violent video games, he would be less likely to do something like that. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。在课文第二部分， A 选项是17岁的 Liam 所提出的看法。他说 I've played them for years and I'm not violent at all. 我已经玩了很多年了，而我一点也不暴力。好，那这边他用到 not at all 来表达一点也不。那我们要补充几个意思差不多的用法。第一个补充的是 anything but， 它字面意思是任何东西但不是那就表达说根本不是什么。后面是可以接名词或形容词来表达绝非、根本不，或者是一点也不怎么样。那 but 在这边是当介系词去表达除了之外。举例来说， The exam was anything but easy. 那个考试一点也不简单。好，那第二个补充的用法是 nowhere near， 意思是not at all 或者是 not nearly 跟他们差不多，那就是表达说与什么相差甚远，一点也不接近。在 nowhere near 后面呢，接了形容词或副词，我们就可以去强调一点也不怎么样，远不及差得远的意思。举例来说， The project is nowhere near finished。那个专案离完成还差得远呢。好，那么第三个补充的用法是 be far from， 它是表达远远不、完全不，后面要接形容词啊、名词或者是动词 ing， 就可以表达一点也不怎么样，远非怎么样。像是 The joke was far from funny， 那个笑话一点也不好笑，离这个好笑的程度差得远了。好，那我们来看看课文第三部分， C 选项是25岁的 Jordan 所提出的看法。他说 Well, I grew up playing them and I turned out fine. 我是玩暴力电玩长大的，结果也没有什么事。那这边要介绍的是 turn out 的用法。turn out 是表达结果是怎么样，最后演变成怎么样，用来带出事情的发展或是最终结果，尤其是指出乎意料的结果。 那我们看几个相关的句型。第一个可以用 turn out to be 加上名词或形容词来表达说最后成为什么什么，最后被发现可能是具有某种身份啊、特性、能力等等。举例来说 The movie turned out to be a disaster. 那部电影结果变成一场灾难，非常的惨。好，再来看到第二个句型是 It turns out that 主词加动词，可以表达结果发现怎么样怎么样。例如 It turns out that they have known each other for a long time. 结果发现他们已经认识很久了。第三个补充的句型是 As it turns out.逗号主词加动词，那这样的句型呢，可以用来说明某事的后续发展有令人意外的结果或情况，类似中文说的结果是怎么样，结果证明怎么样怎么样。例如 As it turned out, they were right to have left early. 结果证明啊，他们早点离开是正确的。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Gateway.Learning a new language can be a gateway to understanding different cultures around the world. Ban. The city government has decided to ban smoking in all public parks. Differ. Although they're friends, Stan and Oliver differ in their political views. Appropriate. Josh's clothing didn't seem appropriate for the formal dinner party. Entertainment. The amusement park offers various forms of entertainment.From rides to live shows. Fantasy. I got so hungry during the hike that I had a fantasy of eating a giant pile of pancakes. Ridiculous. It's hard to believe that Sandra got away with her ridiculous excuse for being late.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time.From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.